Imagine you're the chief financial officer of a major European airline. The year is 2002. Your fleet of 747s is aging out, and you desperately need 12 new wide-body jets.
Right, which is a massive capital investment.
Huge. And the textbook approach is to bring in the two major manufacturers, Boeing and Airbus, have a few polite meetings, and, negotiate the best possible margin.
But that is not what happens here.
Exactly. Instead of negotiating, you lock them in separate metaphorical rooms. You cut off their communication, and you engineer a trap so mathematically brutal that they willingly destroy their own profit margins just to survive.
It's just wild. Today, we're not talking about spreadsheets or traditional accounting.
Yeah.
We are taking you on a journey into the hidden architecture of strategy.
Yeah, our foundational source today is this really brilliant book called Outthink: How to Use Game Theory to Outsmart Your Competition by Sumit Sarkar.
And, I mean, it completely dismantles the illusion that business is this sterile environment where the best product naturally wins. The reality is much closer to a battlefield governed by hidden rules. Success relies almost entirely on, anticipating the moves of self-interested players who are actively trying to corner you.
Which brings us to our mission for you today. We want to extract the ultimate shortcut to being a master strategist.
Yes, and we are bypassing all the dense academic math that usually makes game theory feel so inaccessible.
We're skipping the chalkboards. Instead, we are looking at the mind-bending ways this hidden logic explains everything from, where your local coffee shop is located to the unspoken truces of historical warfare.
It really governs everything.
It does. Okay, let's unpack this. Game theory isn't about crunching numbers in a vacuum. It is about outthinking the competition. And the most logical place to start is with scenarios where you can actually see what your opponent is doing.
Right, so we call these sequential move games. Both players have perfect visibility of the board, and you take turns, kind of like chess.
Okay, so I can see your pieces, you can see mine.
Exactly. You know your options, you know their options. And the core strategy here is a concept called backward induction.
Backward induction?
Yeah, basically, you look forward to all the possible end states of the market, and you reason backward to figure out the exact move you must make right now to achieve the optimal outcome.
Which sounds incredibly straightforward on paper. But when applied by executives under pressure, it leads to completely counterintuitive decisions.
Oh, absolutely.
The book highlights the coffee wars in India as a masterful example of this backward induction in practice. Let's set the stage for you. It's 2012, and Starbucks is finally entering the Indian market.
And everyone in the financial press expects an absolute bloodbath.
Yeah, they assume this global giant is going to roll in, leverage its massive cash reserves, and just aggressively open stores on every single corner to brute force its way to dominance.
Because, that assumption was based entirely on Starbucks' historical playbook, especially in China, where they were opening hundreds of stores at just a breakneck pace.
But India was a fundamentally different landscape, right? Because of the incumbent player, Cafe Coffee Day, or CCD.
Yeah, CCD already possessed a massive, deeply entrenched stronghold. We are talking about over 1,600 outlets spread across more than 200 cities and towns.
1,600. And crucially, CCD's moat wasn't just real estate, it was their supply chain dominance.
That was their superpower.
They controlled the entire process from coffee bean to the actual cup. I think they owned over 10,000 acres of local plantations. They had the roasting facilities, the logistics, just everything.
Right, which means their unit economics were virtually untouchable.
Yeah.
If Starbucks played the expected game, if they went in and tried to compete on price and ubiquitous street presence, they would be walking into a slaughter.
Because CCD's low average costs meant they could easily sustain a head-on price war that would bleed Starbucks dry.
Exactly. But Starbucks recognized this. They applied that backward induction. They anticipated CCD's inevitable response to a mass rollout, saw the mathematical certainty of losing a price war, and just completely abandoned their usual playbook.
They pivoted entirely. They positioned themselves as a premium, exclusive lifestyle brand instead.
Yeah, in their first 2 years, they opened just 58 stores.
Wow, from hundreds to 58.
Right. And they placed them strictly in upscale business districts in places like Mumbai, Delhi, and Bangalore. They were targeting high-level executives who would happily pay a premium for a luxury lounge experience.
I see the strategy as like a classic judo move. You don't step into the ring and try to outlift the heavyweight champion who has a 10,000-acre supply chain advantage.
No, you'd lose.
You step back and challenge them to a gymnastics routine. You force them into a completely different arena where their weight is no longer an advantage, like a chess match where moving your queen guarantees it gets taken by a knight. But isn't it cowardly for a giant like Starbucks to avoid a direct fight?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, it is the purest definition of strategic rationality.
How so?
True strategic rationality means never, ever playing a game where your opponent has an unbeatable, dominant strategy.
A dominant strategy being like their trump card.
Right. A dominant strategy is a move that yields the highest payoff for a player regardless of what you do. CCD's dominant strategy was their unbeatable local supply chain.
So Starbucks understood that if your opponent holds a card that destroys you, the only irrational move is to redefine the game so that their trump card becomes irrelevant.
Exactly. And the crazy part is, they actually forced CCD to start spending heavily to create their own upscale lounges just to try and chase Starbucks into this new premium segment.
That is brilliant, but, you only get to play judo when you can see your opponent's stance. Starbucks had the luxury of observing CCD's supply chain and making a calculated choice.
Right, it doesn't always work like that. Often you are forced to make a massive strategic decision completely blind.
Which is terrifying.
It is. And that transitions us from perfect information to imperfect information. When you can't see the board, you find yourself in a simultaneous move game.
Where you have to commit to an action without knowing what the other side is doing.
Yes. And the most infamous mathematical model for this is the prisoner's dilemma.
Oh, man. The sources outline this perfectly with a real historical case from 1878. A Russian musician named Vladimir and the famous composer Tchaikovsky get detained by authorities in Russia under suspicion of exchanging spy codes.
Right. They are total strangers, but they are suddenly locked in this terrifying simultaneous game.
The authorities put them in separate interrogation rooms. No communication is possible whatsoever, and they offer both men the exact same deal.
The classic trap.
Yeah, if neither confesses, the authorities have weak evidence, and they both get just 1 year in prison. If they both confess, they each get 5 years.
But, and here's the kicker, if one confesses and the other stays silent, the one who confessed gets full immunity and goes free, while the silent one gets slapped with a 10-year sentence.
Let's look at the psychology of why this just breaks people. Because they are completely blind, cold, calculating rationality takes over.
It has to.
Vladimir sits in his cell and does the math. If Tchaikovsky stays silent, confessing is Vladimir's best move because he goes completely free. But if Tchaikovsky confesses, Vladimir absolutely must confess too, or he's getting 10 years.
Right, so no matter what Tchaikovsky does, Vladimir's mathematically optimal move is to confess.
Game theorists call this a Nash equilibrium, right?
They do. It is a state where no player can gain anything by unilaterally changing their own strategy. Out of sheer self-preservation, the only rational choice for both of them is betrayal.
So they both confess.
They both confess, and they both end up serving 5 years, even though, mutual silence would have resulted in only 1 year.
Their perfectly logical individual rationality guarantees a terrible mutual outcome. Which brings us right back to the story we started with. The CFO of Iberia Airlines in 2002. Enrique Dupuy didn't just negotiate for those 12 wide-body planes. He actively weaponized the Nash equilibrium against his suppliers.
He really did. Dupuy contacted Toby Bright at Boeing and John Leahy at Airbus. He told them both that they were in the running for the entire contract, an all-or-nothing deal.
But neither Boeing nor Airbus was allowed to know what the other was bidding.
Right. They were placed in those separate interrogation rooms. Dupuy demanded staggering discounts exceeding 40% off the list price of the planes.
Boeing looked at the board. They feared that if they didn't offer a massive discount, Airbus would steal the entire lucrative order.
And Airbus looked at the board and was terrified of losing their home turf in Europe to an American manufacturer.
Because neither side could verify the other's bid, they couldn't coordinate at all. They both fell straight into the trap. Boeing slashed their prices drastically.
But Airbus ultimately won the contract by offering a discount that nosed just ahead of Boeing's, dropping their price by well over 40%.
Dupuy's leverage was absolute because he understood the architecture of the game. I mean, as a buyer, creating a prisoner's dilemma for your suppliers is the ultimate negotiation hack.
It really is. You
Yeah.
isolate them, introduce the catastrophic threat of total loss, and just let their own blind rationality destroy their margins.
But wait, if you are the one trapped inside the interrogation room as the supplier, how do you hack the lock? If the game is mathematically designed to destroy your profit margins, how do competitors ever manage to find a win-win and survive?
Well, they have to transition the scenario from a prisoner's dilemma into what game theorists call an assurance game.
An assurance game.
Yeah. In an assurance game, mutual cooperation is actually the best possible outcome for everyone, but it only works if you have an absolute guarantee that the other side will cooperate too.
And if you don't have that guarantee,
If you can't guarantee it, you fall right back into destructive competition. The most spectacular example of escaping this trap involves big tobacco in the United States during the 1960s.
oh, this story is wild. The 60s were the absolute golden age of television advertising for tobacco giants like Philip Morris and R.J. Reynolds.
They were everywhere.
They were pouring tens of millions of dollars into primetime TV commercials. They were sponsoring massive family shows like The Flintstones.
Which is crazy to think about now.
I know, but by 1968, the data show they had hit a wall.
Right, the market was saturated. If Philip Morris spent $30 million on television ads and R.J. Reynolds spent $30 million, they essentially just neutralized each other.
So these massive ad buys weren't actually creating enough new smokers to justify the enormous cost.
Exactly. They were purely playing defense. It was a continuous, agonizing drain on their profits.
But they couldn't just stop. If R.J. Reynolds unilaterally pulled their ads, Philip Morris would immediately swoop in, dominate the airwaves, and steal their entire market share.
They were completely paralyzed in a simultaneous move dilemma. Unilateral disarmament was corporate suicide.
Then, in 1970, a massive shift occurred. The U.S. government proposed a total federal ban on TV and radio cigarette advertising.
And the television broadcasters fought it tooth and nail because tobacco ads accounted for roughly 10% of all TV advertising revenue.
That's a massive hit to the networks.
It was, but the tobacco executives, behind closed doors, they quietly welcomed the legislation.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. The government stepping in was the greatest financial gift they could have asked for.
It really was.
I think of it like two exhausted heavyweight boxers who've been beating each other to a pulp for 12 rounds. They are both bleeding, they're both desperate to start punching, but neither one can drop their guard without getting knocked unconscious.
So they are secretly praying for the referee to just step in and call the fight.
Yes. And the federal ad ban was the ultimate referee.
It solved their assurance game by legally forcing everyone to stop advertising simultaneously. It provided the cast-iron enforceable guarantee that if Philip Morris stopped spending, R.J. Reynolds was also legally barred from spending.
By fundamentally changing the rules of the game via federal law, the industry eliminated their biggest overhead expense without yielding a single inch of ground to each other.
The financial impact of having their hands tied was immediate. In the first quarter of 1971, right after the ban took effect, the tobacco industry's profits didn't just stabilize. They jumped by a staggering $93 million.
They engineered a massive financial windfall simply by being forced to stop fighting.
But the tobacco companies got very lucky.
Yeah, they did.
They had a federal referee with the power of law to save them from themselves. In the Wild West of the free market, nobody is coming to save you.
Right.
If you want to force a truce or guarantee a specific outcome, you have to engineer your own referee. You have to prove to your competitor that you aren't going to back down.
Which requires an entirely different strategic toolkit. If you have no external referee, the only way to gain undeniable credibility is to intentionally destroy your own options.
This brings us to the mechanics of anti-coordination games, famously known as the game of chicken.
Okay, chicken.
In a game of chicken, the only way to win is to convince your opponent that you are absolutely committed to your course of action and that you are physically incapable of swerving.
And the most terrifyingly effective way to signal that commitment is to actively burn your own bridges.
Exactly. The ultimate historical flex of this strategy comes from Hernán Cortés in 1519.
Oh, this is a great example. He lands his men on the shores of Mexico, and he is facing a massive empire.
Right, and he knows his own soldiers are exhausted, outnumbered, and terrified.
Some of his men are actively conspiring to mutiny, seize the ships, and sail safely back to Cuba. So Cortés makes a calculated, permanent move. He orders all 11 of his own ships to be scuttled and sunk right there in the harbor.
He deliberately destroyed his only means of retreat. By eliminating the physical option to go backward, he sent an undeniable mathematical signal to both his own men and the local empires. We are here to fight, and we cannot leave.
That is what game theorists call a credible commitment.
Yes, and now, contrast that extreme physical skin in the game with a disastrous corporate bluff by Boeing in 1993.
Ah, right. In 1993, the airline industry is desperately projecting the need for an ultra-high capacity airliner, like a super jumbo jet.
Both Boeing and Airbus are scrutinizing the market research. And the data is clear. The market for a super jumbo is actually quite small.
If both companies spend the estimated $15 billion to develop this massive plane, they will both lose billions because there aren't enough total buyers to go around.
But if only one company builds it, they capture a monopoly and make a fortune. It is a high-stakes corporate game of chicken.
So Boeing decided they needed to preempt Airbus. They wanted to force Airbus to swerve and abandon the idea. So Boeing went on a massive PR offensive.
They put out a bold press release in Business Week, loudly announcing they were developing a 600 to 800-seat plane, the biggest airliner ever conceived.
They were attempting to signal unshakable commitment.
But the strategy completely collapsed.
Airbus didn't blink.
Nope. They looked right past the press release and called the bluff. Why? Because Boeing hadn't actually sunk any of their ships. A press release cost nothing.
Right. Boeing didn't put down massive, non-refundable capital for new manufacturing facilities, and they didn't halt production on their existing 747 lines to retool.
It was just words without financial backing. Airbus ignored the noise, went ahead and poured billions into building the A380 anyway, and Boeing eventually backed down, quietly canceling their super jumbo project.
Wow.
What's fascinating here is the counterintuitive logic of strategy.
Mm.
Sometimes, maintaining flexibility is a lethal weakness.
Because having fewer options actually makes you significantly stronger.
Exactly. Boeing kept all their options open, which entirely destroyed their credibility. If you want to win a game of chicken, you can't just tell the other driver you won't swerve.
You have to visibly rip the steering wheel out of your car and throw it out the window where your opponent can see it.
Precisely.
We see this exact concept of eliminating options playing out violently in spatial strategy right now. Look at Costa Coffee's expansion in China.
Oh, this is a brilliant modern example.
The traditional logic of opening a retail store is spatial differentiation. You want to find an empty neighborhood, a stretch of beach with no competition, so you can monopolize the local foot traffic.
But Costa deliberately rejects that. They actively hunt down established Starbucks locations and aggressively sign leases right next door.
To the untrained eye, inviting that level of direct head-to-head competition seems deeply irrational.
But it relies on a spatial economics concept known as Hotelling's law.
How does that work?
Imagine a mile-long beach. If one ice cream vendor sets up right in the middle, they capture everyone. If a second vendor arrives and sets up at the far end of the beach, they only capture the people immediately around them.
Okay, that makes sense.
But if that second vendor sets up right next to the first vendor, dead in the center of the beach, they completely neutralized the first vendor's location advantage, forcing a perfect 50-50 split of the entire beach's foot traffic.
So Costa is intentionally burning the bridge of spatial differentiation. By surrendering the advantage of being the convenient, close-by option in an empty neighborhood, they force the consumer to make a purchasing decision based purely on brand preference rather than location.
They turn what should be a massive locational disadvantage into a direct branding war, mathematically guaranteeing they siphon off a huge chunk of Starbucks' existing customer base.
It is a brilliant anti-coordination move. Costa commits to the fight by putting themselves in a physical position where they must compete relentlessly on quality and brand perception, completely eliminating the safe option of hiding in uncontested territory.
It really is.
But here is where the Costa Coffee strategy falls apart for me in a broader business context. Burning your boats or ripping out a steering wheel is a very dramatic, permanent trick for a one-off battle.
True.
In reality, most of us are competing against the exact same 3 or 4 software companies or the same rival firms every single quarter. I can't just keep burning boats indefinitely. What happens to the math when you have to face the exact same competitor tomorrow, next week, and next year?
The math changes entirely. When games are played repeatedly over an infinite or at least unknown time horizon, you enter the realm of the shadow of the future.
The shadow of the future.
Yeah, the brutal, cutthroat logic that dictates betrayal in a one-shot prisoner's dilemma actually softens into a mathematical requirement for cooperation.
The sources show us this isn't just an abstract economic theory either. It is literally baked into the evolutionary biology of the planet.
It is. Take Richard Dawkins' famous research on grudger birds.
Right. These birds get deadly parasite ticks on their heads in places they cannot reach. They absolutely require mutual preening from other birds to survive.
And Dawkins ran complex simulations on the survival rates of different behavioral strategies. If a bird plays as a sucker and preens everyone without demanding anything in return, they are quickly exploited and die out.
And if a bird plays as a cheat?
If they accept a preening but fly away before returning the favor, they thrive brilliantly in the short term.
Yeah.
But quickly, the cheats outnumber everyone. Nobody is preening anyone, and the entire species collapses from parasites.
But the species survives because of the third strategy, the grudgers.
Yes.
A grudger bird will gladly help you out and preen you, but if you cheat them, they possess the memory to hold a grudge. They will never, ever preen you again.
It is a repeated game where survival absolutely depends on the credible threat of punishing bad actors.
Yeah.
You see the exact same dynamic in the ocean with cleaner fish.
Oh, the ones that swim into shark mouths.
Yeah, these tiny fish swim directly into the mouths of massive sharks to eat dead skin and parasites. In a one-shot game, the shark's mathematically optimal move is to just snap its jaws and eat the fish for a quick snack.
But it doesn't.
Because the shark implicitly understands the shadow of the future. If it eats the cleaner fish today, it secures a tiny, negligible meal. But next week, when it is covered in debilitating parasites, there will be no cleaner fish left willing to approach it.
The shark restrains its immediate predatory instinct because the compounding promise of future health treatments heavily outweighs the immediate fleeting payoff of a tiny meal. We see this exact same shift from brutality to cooperation in human conflict, even in the absolute darkest of circumstances.
Human conflict is a perfect parallel.
Think about the nightmare of the trenches in World War I. You have British and German soldiers locked in horrific existential combat. We all know about the famous Christmas truce of 1914. But beyond that single holiday, historians documented widespread, unspoken live and let live strategies developing across the Western Front.
Soldiers on both sides quietly established unspoken rules of engagement. They would intentionally aim high during mealtimes. They would stop artillery bombardments while the other side was washing.
And the high command hated this, right?
Oh, they despised it. They had to constantly rotate troops around the front lines to disrupt these truces. But the truces kept spontaneously reemerging because the soldiers were staring at the exact same enemies across the wire day after day.
It was an infinitely repeated game.
Yes, they realized the math. If they shot an enemy soldier eating his breakfast on Tuesday, the enemy would absolutely retaliate and shoot them while they were eating breakfast on Wednesday.
Which brings us perfectly to how modern cartels maintain their grip on the global economy, specifically OPEC.
Ah, OPEC, the ultimate repeated game.
You have an alliance of sovereign nations that control a massive percentage of the world's crude oil reserves. They sit around a table and agree to strict weekly production quotas. They artificially constrain the global supply of oil to keep prices sky high.
And the temptation for any single nation to cheat is just astronomical.
Yeah, I mean, if the global price of oil is artificially high, a single country could secretly pump an extra million barrels, sell it at the inflated price, and inject billions into their economy.
In a one-shot game, every single country would cheat, flood the market, and the price of oil would instantly crash to the floor.
But they don't crash the market because OPEC enforces what game theorists call a grim trigger strategy.
Yes, if a member country defects and pumps more than their allotted quota, they are warned. If they continue to cheat, the cartel triggers the punishment.
OPEC suspends them, effectively kicking them out of the coordinated network, which is exactly what they did to Ecuador in 1992 and Indonesia in 2009.
The credible threat of losing the immense long-term benefits of the cartel keeps everyone in line.
So what does this all mean? Doesn't this totally contradict the foundational premise of game theory that players are inherently selfish?
This raises an important question, but the answer is a definitive no. It doesn't contradict the premise at all.
Okay, explain that.
What we are seeing with the grudger birds, the WWI soldiers in the trenches, and the OPEC nations isn't altruism. It isn't morality, and it certainly isn't kindness. It is purely 100% selfish rationality.
So they haven't miraculously become nicer.
Not at all. They have just done the math over a longer timeline. They have calculated that the compounding long-term payoff of sustained cooperation is mathematically superior to the short-term thrill of cheating.
Wow.
Trust in a repeated game is not based on goodwill. Trust is based entirely on the mutually assured, credible threat of future punishment.
That is such a clarifying way to view the world. Trust is just math mapped over a long enough timeline.
It really is.
We've covered incredible ground today. We unpacked how Starbucks avoided a bloodbath by applying backward induction to redefine the game.
We explored the psychological torture of the Nash equilibrium and how the CFO of Iberia Airlines weaponized it to force Airbus and Boeing to destroy their own margins.
We examined how Big Tobacco eagerly embraced a government ban to escape the mutually destructive assurance game of advertising.
And we analyzed the incredible power of burning your own ships to signal credible commitment, contrasting Cortez with Boeing's failure and seeing how Costa Coffee uses that exact logic to steal foot traffic.
And finally, we saw how the brutal, cutthroat logic of betrayal softens into cooperative strategies in repeated games, driven by the long shadow of the future.
Game theory proves that the spreadsheet is never the whole story. The real game is always being played one level deeper.
Before we sign off, I want to leave you, the listener, with a new thread to pull on. We've talked about human and corporate behavior today, but if trust and cooperation are simply mathematical inevitabilities over a long enough timeline, what happens when we unleash artificial intelligence into the free market?
Oh, that is a huge question right now.
We are already seeing competing AI pricing algorithms on major e-commerce platforms subtly learning to keep prices high. No human programmed them to collude.
They simply ran the millions of microsimulations, experienced the shadow of the future, and independently discovered their own grim trigger strategies.
Exactly. As these algorithms take over more of our economy, we have to ask, how do you regulate a cartel when the colluding members are just lines of code that figured out the math? Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.
It's been great.
Until next time, remember to look at the board just a little more strategically.